The Gianni's restaurant in Manhattan gleamed under crystal chandeliers, a sanctuary for New York's elite. Every surface reflected wealth and power. The dining room buzzed with the quiet confidence of those who never worried about money. Tailored suits, diamond necklaces, and the subtle scent of expensive cologne created an atmosphere of exclusivity. Emma Reynolds moved between tables with practiced grace. At 25, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Not too fast to appear hurried, not too slow to irritate. Her black uniform pristine, her polite smile never reaching her eyes. The wealthy rarely looked at her face anyway. Through 6 years of serving the privileged, Emma had learned to read people. The businessman who overtipped to compensate for his affair. The socialite who underpaid because cruelty was her hobby. The politicians who whispered secrets believing service staff were furniture rather than people with ears and memories. Tonight, the private dining section hummed with unusual energy. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Someone important was coming, someone who made even the restaurant manager smooth his already immaculate tie 3 times in 5 minutes. "Reynolds," the floor manager whispered urgently. "Table 7 needs special attention tonight. Mr. Castellano specifically requested our most discreet server." Emma nodded without emotion, though her pulse quickened. Everyone in New York hospitality knew the Castellano name, even if they pretended otherwise. Don Carlo Salvatore, 70 years old and still commanding respect across 5 boroughs. The papers called him a successful businessman and philanthropist. The whispers called him something else entirely. "Of course," Emma responded, voice carefully neutral. "Any special requirements?" "Impeccable service. No eye contact unless addressed directly." And Reynolds, the manager, leaned closer. "Forget anything you might hear." Emma moved toward the back service area, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar motions of preparing the private dining room. Fresh linens, crystal water glasses, the special reserve wine list. Her practiced efficiency masked the constant calculations running through her mind. Tonight's tips could cover next month's medication for her mother. She carried the weight of her father's antique pocket watch in her apron, a ritual that had become superstition. The smooth metal against her hip was a constant reminder of time passing, of promises unkept. Robert Reynolds had gifted it to her on her 5th birthday, the last one before the fire that took him. The restaurant's back door opened with a burst of cold winter air. 3 men in expensive suits entered, first eyes scanning every corner before nodding. Then Don Carlo himself appeared, smaller than his reputation suggested, but somehow filling the room with his presence. His silver hair perfectly groomed, his posture impeccable despite his age. The men around him moved with the coordinated precision of satellites orbiting a planet. Emma kept her eyes appropriately lowered as she approached with water. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Gianni's." Don Carlo observed her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you, young lady." His accent carried the faint melody of Sicily despite decades in America. He settled into his seat with the ease of a man accustomed to deference. The others followed, creating a constellation of power around him. For 2 hours, Emma served them with mechanical perfection. The men spoke in hushed tones, occasionally switching to Italian when sensitive topics arose. Emma understood fragments from her childhood lessons with her grandmother, but revealed nothing in her expression. Her father had taught her the value of listening more than speaking. As dessert concluded, Emma overheard Don Carlo on his phone, voice lowered but sharp with authority. "The situation at the harbor needs immediate attention. Ensure everything is cleaned up by morning. No loose ends this time." Her hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee. The harbor, where her father had worked before his death in the mysterious warehouse fire 20 years ago. A coincidence, surely. New York had many harbors. While collecting empty glasses, Emma glanced at the photographs adorning the private room walls. Mostly vintage scenes of Sicily and old New York. But one frame near Don Carlo's seat captured her complete attention, sending a jolt of recognition through her body. 2 men shaking hands in front of a warehouse. A younger Don Carlo, perhaps 40, and beside him, unmistakably, her father, Robert Reynolds. The same gentle eyes, the same crooked smile she remembered from childhood. The smile that disappeared from her life in a warehouse fire when she was just 6 years old. The coffee pot slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Hot liquid splashed across her shoes, but Emma felt nothing. Every eye in the room turned toward her, including the cold, calculating gaze of Don Carlo Salvatore. "I apologize," Emma stammered, kneeling to collect broken porcelain, her eyes still fixed on the photograph. 20 years of questions crystallized into this moment. the coincidence too precise to ignore. Don Carlo followed her gaze to the photograph, then back to her face. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something unexpected. Fear. "Leave us," he commanded his associates with a single hand gesture. The men departed without question, closing the door behind them. Emma stood frozen, coffee soaking into her shoes. Her training told her to apologize again and retreat. Her heart demanded answers. "Sir," she began, her voice barely audible. "The man in that photograph with you." Don Carlo's expression hardened. "You should return to your duties, Miss Reynolds," she supplied. Emma Reynolds. The name hung in the air between them. Don Carlo's composure cracked momentarily before he reassembled it with practiced discipline. "Reynolds," he repeated, the word heavy with recognition. An unfortunate coincidence. Emma's professional mask dissolved. 20 years of wondering, of her mother's evasive answers, of nightmares about fire consuming everything she loved. She pointed at the photograph, hand trembling. "That man is my father, Robert Reynolds. He supposedly died in a warehouse fire when I was 6 years old." Don Carlo's face remained impressively neutral, but his hands betrayed him, fingers pressing white against the tablecloth. "You are mistaken. That man was a business associate from many years ago." "I know my father's face," Emma insisted, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming caution. "His watch is in my pocket right now, the one he always wore, identical to the one visible in that photograph on his wrist." The old man's eyes narrowed. "You're overstepping, Miss Reynolds. 20 years I've wondered what really happened to him. And now I find him in a photograph with you in a private dining room I'm not supposed to look at too carefully." Don Carlo stood slowly, his age momentarily visible in the stiffness of his movements. He studied Emma with the careful assessment of a chess player evaluating an unexpected move. "Your father worked for my company briefly, a regrettable employee who made poor choices." His voice carried practiced authority. "He betrayed certain confidences. The fire was unfortunate, but not unexpected given his carelessness." Anger flared in Emma's chest, burning away caution. "My father wasn't careless. He was methodical, careful about everything. You knew him as a child knows a father. I knew him as an employer knows an employee." Don Carlo buttoned his jacket slowly. "This conversation is finished. I suggest you forget this encounter if you value your current employment." Emma felt something shift inside her. Fear gave way to a cold determination she hadn't known she possessed. "Sir, with respect, this conversation has just begun." Don Carlo moved with surprising speed for his age, closing the distance between them. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Young women who ask questions about the past often find the present becomes uncomfortable. Your mother Sarah still lives in that small apartment in Brooklyn, does she not? Still struggling with her health." Ice replaced the fire in Emma's veins. The casual mention of her mother's name and residence wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. "I meant no disrespect," Emma said, training reasserting itself. Self-preservation overcame curiosity. "I believe you did." Don Carlo straightened his already perfect tie. "But youth excuses many transgressions. Once, you're dismissed from your position here, effective immediately. Antonio will escort you out." As if summoned by thought alone, the door opened and a stone-faced man in a dark suit appeared. "See, Miss Reynolds receives her final payment and exits through the service entrance. Ensure she understands the importance of discretion." Emma gathered her few belongings from her locker, mind racing. The envelope Antonio handed her contained $5,000 in cash. Far more than her outstanding wages, enough to cover her mother's medication for months. Both payment and warning. The night air hit her face as she exited into the back alley. Her practical side told her to take the money, forget the photograph, protect her mother. But 20 years of questions couldn't be silenced by fear or cash. Emma tucked the envelope deep into her pocket alongside her father's watch and began walking toward the subway, senses alert to every shadow. 3 blocks later, she noticed the black sedan moving slowly behind her, matching her pace precisely. Heart pounding, she turned suddenly into a narrow passage between buildings, a shortcut known to locals that led to a busier street. The car couldn't follow, but would likely circle around to intercept her. Emma broke into a run, thankful for her practical shoes and intimate knowledge of the neighborhood's maze-like alleys. Her lungs burned in the cold air as she navigated the urban labyrinth, changing direction frequently. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the winter chill. Every shadow held potential danger, every stranger a possible threat. The weight of the cash in her pocket felt like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. Emma emerged onto a crowded avenue, blending into the pedestrian traffic with practiced ease. She boarded a subway heading in the opposite direction from her home, changing trains twice, before finally heading toward Brooklyn. The familiar ritual of navigation through the city provided small comfort as her mind replayed the encounter with Don Carlo. The photograph couldn't be denied. Her father had known Don Carlo Salvatore, known him well enough to be photographed in what appeared to be a significant moment. The warehouse in the background looked remarkably similar to the one where Robert Reynolds supposedly died in a fire. The train rattled beneath the East River as Emma closed her eyes, remembering fragments from childhood. Her father's late-night phone calls, hushed arguments with her mother, the strange men who sometimes waited outside their apartment building. Details that meant nothing to a child but now arranged themselves into a troubling pattern. Her apartment building looked exactly as she had left it that morning, yet somehow changed by the knowledge she now carried. Emma climbed the 4 flights of stairs, slowly, each step heavier than the last. Her mother would be asleep already, medication making her drowsy by 8 each evening. The apartment was dark except for the small nightlight in the hallway. Emma moved quietly past her mother's bedroom door, hearing the familiar soft snoring that indicated Sarah Reynolds was deep in medication-induced sleep. In her own small bedroom, Emma pulled the chain on her reading lamp and emptied her pockets. The envelope of cash. Her father's pocket watch brass case worn smooth from years of handling. She opened the back of the watch case, where a small photograph of her parents on their wedding day remained perfectly preserved. Emma studied her father's face in the tiny picture, comparing it to the image she'd seen in Don Carlo's private dining room. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile, the same person but perhaps not the same man. Who had Robert Reynolds really been? She opened her closet and reached for the small wooden box on the top shelf, hidden behind winter sweaters. The last remnants of her father's possessions, saved from her mother's attempts to erase all evidence of him after his death. Sarah claimed it was too painful to keep reminders around, but Emma now wondered if there had been another reason. The box contained few treasures: a baseball from a Yankees game they had attended, his wedding ring returned after the fire with surprisingly little damage, a fountain pen he had used to write letters, and beneath these, wrapped in soft cloth, a leather-bound journal Emma had never been able to open. The lock, though tiny, had resisted her childhood attempts to pick it. Tonight, fueled by new determination, she examined the journal more carefully. The lock seemed designed for a specific key smaller than any she possessed. On impulse, she studied her father's pocket watch closely, noticing for the first time that the winding mechanism seemed unusually elaborate. With careful fingers, she pressed and turned the crown in various combinations until something clicked. A tiny compartment in the watch case opened, revealing a miniature brass key. Emma's hands trembled as she fitted the key to the journal's lock. The mechanism turned with surprising ease, as if recently oiled despite 20 years of disuse. The journal fell open to reveal pages of neat handwriting interspersed with diagrams and codes. The first page contained no codes or secrets, just a simple message in her father's handwriting. If you are reading this, Emma, it means you've started asking the right questions. I always knew you would someday. You have your mother's beauty, but my curiosity. I'm sorry for the truths I kept from you. I'm sorry for the danger this knowledge might bring. Most of all, I'm sorry I couldn't watch you grow into the remarkable woman I know you've become. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she turned to the next page, where the handwriting changed to something more urgent, the neat script giving way to hastily scrawled notes. At the top, a single phrase stood out, circled multiple times: Project Phoenix. Beneath it, her father had written, "Carlo knows they've compromised the project. Not safe to contact FBI directly. Trust no one until confirmation of loyalty." Emma flipped through more pages, finding coordinates, names she didn't recognize, and references to meetings and exchanges. The final entry, dated 3 days before the warehouse fire, chilled her blood. A is moving against C, claims evidence of betrayal. I've hidden backup at SDB 247. Sarah has emergency key and contact. If anything happens, tell Emma the truth when she's old enough. She deserves to know her father wasn't what they'll claim I was. Emma closed the journal, mind racing. A moving against C, Anthony against Carlo. The warehouse in the photograph. Project Phoenix, FBI. None of it aligned with the story her mother had told about a structural engineer who died in an accidental fire. She moved to her mother's bedroom door, hand poised to knock, then hesitated. Sarah Reynolds had been fragile since her diagnosis 5 years ago. The combination of heart condition and medication left her vulnerable to stress. Was tonight the right time to confront 20 years of apparent lies? Before Emma could decide, a noise from the living room froze her in place. The subtle sound of the window latch being manipulated. Someone was breaking in. Emma retreated silently to her bedroom, grabbing her phone and the journal. The fire escape outside her window offered an emergency exit, but using it meant leaving her mother behind. Unacceptable. Instead, she positioned herself behind her bedroom door, clutching the heavy metal flashlight she kept for emergencies. She heard careful footsteps in the living room, too deliberate for a common burglar. They moved with purpose toward her mother's bedroom. Emma stepped into the hallway, flashlight raised. "Stop right there." The intruder, dressed in dark clothing with a face obscured by shadow, paused momentarily before lunging toward her. Emma swung the flashlight with all her strength, connecting solidly with the attacker's shoulder. He grunted in pain, but didn't fall, instead grabbing for her arm. Emma kicked hard at his knee, hearing a satisfying crack as he stumbled. She brought the flashlight down again, this time connecting with his head. The man crumpled to the floor. Light suddenly flooded the apartment as Sarah Reynolds appeared in her doorway, finger on the light switch, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Emma, what's happening?" Before Emma could answer, the fallen intruder moved with surprising speed, rolling toward the front door. Emma pursued him into the hallway, but he was already disappearing down the stairs, limping but determined. She returned to find her mother leaning heavily against the doorframe, face pale with shock. "Who was that? Should we call the police?" Sarah's voice trembled, her hand pressed against her chest where her heartbeat would be dangerously accelerated. Emma guided her mother to the couch, helping her sit before retrieving her medication from the bathroom cabinet. "Just a burglar, Mom. He's gone now. Here, take your pills." Sarah accepted the medication with shaking hands, but her eyes remained fixed on Emma's face. "Not a burglar," she whispered after swallowing her pills. "They found us, haven't they? You've done something to make them notice us again." The words confirmed every suspicion that had formed in Emma's mind since seeing the photograph. Her mother knew, had always known. "I saw Dad in a photograph tonight," Emma said quietly, "with Don Carlos Salvatore." Sarah closed her eyes, shoulders slumping in defeat. "Where?" "At Gianni's restaurant, in the private dining room. They were shaking hands in front of a warehouse." Emma sat beside her mother, taking her cold hands. "Mom, who was Dad really? What was Project Phoenix?" Sarah's eyes remained closed, tears leaking from beneath the lids. "Your father was a good man, Emma. Everything I told you about that was true." "But he wasn't a structural engineer, was he?" Sarah opened her eyes, suddenly looking much older than her 55 years. "He was FBI, undercover in Salvatore's organization, investigating corruption that reached into federal agencies." The confirmation should have been shocking, but instead felt like the final piece sliding into place in a puzzle Emma had been assembling her entire life. "And the fire wasn't an accident." Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, it was meant to silence him and to send a message to anyone else who might consider betraying the family." "But Don Carlos seemed surprised to see me, almost afraid." "Carlos Salvatore is a complicated man," Sarah replied, her voice stronger now, as if unburdening herself. Provided new energy. "Your father believed Carlo wasn't behind the order to kill him. He suspected Carlo's son Anthony, but we could never prove anything." Emma retrieved her father's journal, showing it to her mother. "I found the key in his watch." Sarah stared at the journal with a mixture of recognition and dread. "He always said you'd find it someday, that you had his instincts." She reached beneath her nightgown, pulling out a chain with a small key. "This opens a safety deposit box at First National on Monroe Street. Box 247. Your father left evidence there, insurance, in case something happened to him. Why didn't you tell me before? Why let me believe the lie all these years?" Sarah's hand trembled as she removed the chain from around her neck. "To protect you. As long as you knew nothing, believed nothing, they had no reason to harm you." She pressed the key into Emma's palm. "But now that you've seen Carlo, now that you know there's no going back, they'll assume you know everything." "The man who broke in was sent to search, not to kill." "Not yet, but that will change once they realize you have the journal and know about the safety deposit box." Sarah gripped Emma's wrist with surprising strength. "You need to contact Frank Russo. He was your father's handler at the FBI, the only one your father trusted completely." Emma's mind raced, trying to absorb everything. "How do I find him?" Sarah recited a phone number from memory. "Memorize it. Don't write it down. Tell him Phoenix rises at dawn. He'll understand." "I should take you somewhere safe first." Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, I'd only slow you down. And they won't harm me immediately. They'll wait to see if I lead them to you." She cupped Emma's face with trembling hands. "You are so like him. Same determination. Same sense of justice. He would be so proud of the woman you've become. Emma felt tears threatening. I can't just leave you. You must, tonight. Take only what you absolutely need. Use cash only. And Emma, Sarah's voice broke slightly, trust no one until you speak with Frank. Your father believed there was a traitor in the FBI, someone who revealed his identity. Emma packed quickly, taking only essential clothing, her father's journal, the safety deposit box key, and the envelope of cash from Don Carlo. Her mother insisted she leave immediately, promising to call her sister in New Jersey to come stay with her. When this is over, Sarah said, as they embraced at the door, when you find the truth, remember that your father wanted justice, not vengeance. Emma nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. She kissed her mother's cheek one last time before slipping out into the night, the weight of her father's pocket watch heavy against her heart. The city that had always been her home now felt alien and threatening. Every passing car, a potential danger. Every security camera, a watching eye. Emma walked quickly but not suspiciously, maintaining the careful balance between haste and attention-drawing panic. In her mind, she recited the phone number her mother had given her, burning it into her memory. She would find a public phone, something increasingly rare in the digital age, to make the call. Then she would go directly to the bank, though it wouldn't open until morning. As Emma turned a corner, she spotted a black sedan idling half a block away, identical to the one that had followed her earlier. She ducked into a convenience store, pretending to browse while watching through the window. Two men emerged from the car, scanning the street methodically. The store's back exit opened into an alley. Emma slipped through it, emerging into the maze of Brooklyn's back streets that she knew intimately from years of walking home late after shifts. She navigated by instinct, changing direction, frequently doubling back to ensure she wasn't followed. Finally confident she had lost any pursuit, Emma found an old payphone outside a gas station. She dialed the number, hands shaking slightly as she fed coins into the slot. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Russo. Emma took a deep breath. Phoenix rises at dawn. A long silence followed, then, who is this? Emma Reynolds. Robert Reynolds was my father. Another pause, longer this time. Where are you? I need to know I can trust you first. The man sighed, a sound filled with decades of weariness. Your father called you Hummingbird because you never stopped moving as a child. He carried a photograph of you in his FBI badge against all protocols. Details only someone who truly knew her father would know. Emma provided her location, and Russo promised to meet her in 30 minutes at an all-night diner 3 blocks away. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truck drivers at the counter and a tired waitress refilling coffee cups. Emma chose a booth with a clear view of both the front entrance and the kitchen's back door. She ordered coffee she didn't want, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth and stability. 20 minutes later, the bell above the door chimed. A man in his early 60s entered, scanning the diner with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime assessing threats. His hair was silver, his face weathered by time and experience, but his posture remained military straight. Their eyes met, and Frank Russo nodded once before approaching her table. You look just like him, he said quietly, sliding into the booth opposite her. Same eyes, same determination. Emma studied the man who might be her father's trusted colleague or the traitor who betrayed him. I need answers, and I've waited 20 years to provide them. Frank signaled the waitress for coffee. But first, tell me how you found yourself in this situation after all this time. Emma explained everything from the photograph at Johnny's to Don Carlo's reaction, the journal, the intruder, and her mother's revelations. Frank listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Carlo Salvatore, he muttered when she finished. I never thought he'd still be around after all this time. My mother seemed to think he wasn't responsible for my father's death. Frank nodded slowly. Your father believed the same. Carlo was trying to legitimize his business operations. Project Phoenix was part of that effort. What exactly was Project Phoenix? Not what, who? Frank's voice dropped lower. Phoenix was your father's code name in the operation. The rising from ashes was symbolic of how we planned to rebuild after bringing down the corrupt elements. Emma processed this information. And the safety deposit box? Insurance. Your father suspected someone inside the FBI was working with Anthony Salvatore. The night before he died, Robert told me he had compiled evidence identifying the traitor. He never had the chance to tell me who it was. Frank's hands tightened around his coffee mug. I've spent 20 years trying to finish what he started, but the trail went cold without his evidence. So the box might contain the name of the person who betrayed him and proof of Anthony's crimes that even his father couldn't protect him from. Frank leaned forward. Emma, if we can get that evidence, we can finally bring Anthony to justice and clear your father's name. The Bureau still has him listed as a rogue agent who turned. The weight of this mission settled on Emma's shoulders. The bank opens at 9. Frank checked his watch. That gives us 6 hours to prepare. We need somewhere safe to wait. As if on cue, Frank's phone buzzed. He checked the message, face darkening. We need to move. Now, your mother has been taken to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. Apparent heart attack. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. That's not possible. I just left her. She was fine. Frank's expression was grim. It's a trap, Emma. They're using your mother as bait. Then I have to go. She needs me. That's exactly what they want. Anthony's men will be waiting. Emma stood, decision already made. I'm not abandoning my mother. Frank sighed, recognizing the same stubborn determination he'd seen in Robert Reynolds decades earlier. Then we go smart, together, but first, he reached into his jacket, producing a small silver coin that caught the diner's fluorescent light. Your father wanted you to have this. Emma accepted the coin instantly, recognizing it as a twin to the one in her father's journal drawings. What is it? The other half of the key, Frank explained. Your father's final insurance policy. The safety deposit box requires both physical keys and a specific coin as authentication. Emma slipped the coin into her pocket alongside her father's watch. The weight of both felt like a promise, a connection to the father she had lost and the truth she was determined to find. Together, they stepped out into the night, moving toward an uncertain reunion and dangerous confrontation. The city lights reflected off still wet pavement, creating illusions of depth and shadow, where dangers might hide or truths might finally be revealed. Brooklyn Methodist Hospital loomed against the night sky windows, glowing in patterns that mimicked the constellations above. Emma Reynolds stood across the street, studying the entrance where ambulances periodically arrived with their cargo of human suffering. Somewhere inside those walls, her mother waited. Bait in a trap or genuine medical emergency, the distinction mattered less than the imperative to reach her. Frank Russo observed the hospital with the practiced eye of a man who had spent decades anticipating ambush. Main entrance will be watched. Emergency room 2. Service entrance is our best option. Emma nodded, pulling her father's pocket watch from her jacket. The familiar weight provided strange comfort. If this is a trap, why did they take her to a real hospital? Credibility. Public setting reduces their options for violence, but provides plenty of opportunities for quiet abduction. Frank checked his weapon discreetly. Anthony Salvatore prefers operating in gray areas. Plausible deniability is his specialty. They crossed the street, moving with purpose but not urgency. Nothing attracted attention in New York like someone trying to avoid it. The service entrance required a key card, but Frank produced a small electronic device that bypassed the security with worrying ease. Bureau equipment, Emma asked as they slipped inside. Frank's smile didn't reach his eyes. Officially, this device doesn't exist. The hospital corridors hummed with the quiet efficiency of night shift healthcare. Emma's years of medical school before dropping out provided useful knowledge. She borrowed a lab coat from an unattended office, directing Frank to do the same. Simple disguises, but effective for moving through institutional settings where staff rarely questioned those who projected confidence. At the nursing station, Emma approached with professional composure. Patient information for Sarah Reynolds admitted tonight. The nurse glanced up, then checked her computer. Room 412, cardiac observation unit. Are you on her care team? Emma smiled. Cardiology consult. Dr. Mercer asked me to review her case. The lie came easily justified by necessity. The elevator ride to the 4th floor stretched into eternity. Frank positioned himself near the control panel, allowing him clear sight lines when the doors opened. The soft electronic tone, announcing their arrival, seemed unnaturally loud in the tension. I'll check the hallway first, Frank murmured. Stay behind me. The corridor appeared normal. Nurses moved between rooms, charts were updated, medication administered. The mundane rhythm of hospital night shift continued undisturbed. Either they had arrived before Anthony's men, or the trap was extraordinarily well disguised. Room 412 had a single police officer stationed outside. Expected protocol for potential victims of crime, but the timing raised Frank's suspicions. He nudged Emma gently. That's not NYPD standard procedure for medical emergencies, he whispered. Either Anthony has influence with the police captain, or that's not a real officer. Emma studied the man from a distance. His uniform appeared correct, but something in his posture seemed wrong. The way he shifted his weight suggested unfamiliarity with the utility belt all officers wore daily. Impersonation, she concluded quietly. A real officer would have positioned himself with better sight lines down both corridor directions. Frank nodded approvingly. Your father's daughter indeed. We need a distraction. Emma moved toward the nurse's station, adopting an expression of professional concern. Excuse me, I think there's a problem with the medication order for 416. The system shows potential contraindication with the patient's blood pressure medication. The charge nurse frowned, rising immediately. That's impossible. I checked all orders myself. Perhaps the system updated after your review, Emma suggested. Could you take a quick look? The attending will be here any minute for rounds. As the nursing staff focused on the fictional medication error, Frank approached the fake officer with the confident stride of law enforcement. Detective Maloney, organized crime. Captain sent me to relieve you. The guard hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. I wasn't informed of any relief. Frank moved closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Change of plans. We got word Salvatore's people might make a move tonight. Captain wants all units at the exits. He flashed what appeared to be a detective's badge, too quickly for detailed inspection. The guard's hand drifted toward his weapon, indecision clear in his eyes. Frank maintained steady eye contact, body language conveying absolute authority. After a moment's hesitation, the guard nodded. I'll check with dispatch, he said, reaching for his radio. Frank's movement was lightning quick. His hand clamped over the guard's radio while simultaneously applying pressure to a specific point on the man's neck. The fake officer slumped forward unconscious before he could react. Frank caught him easily, making the collapse appear like a colleague steadying another. Medical emergency, Frank called out loudly enough for witnesses, but not so loud as to cause alarm. Officer down. The distraction at the nursing station transformed into legitimate response. Staff rushed forward with a wheelchair, allowing Frank to deposit the unconscious man and direct them toward an examination room. In the controlled chaos, Emma slipped into her mother's room unnoticed. Sarah Reynolds lay unnaturally still against white hospital sheets, her face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. Monitors beeped steadily, displaying vital signs that appeared stabilized but concerning. An oxygen cannula rested beneath her nose, and an IV delivered clear fluid into her arm. Emma moved to her mother's bedside, experienced eyes scanning the monitors and medication bags. Nothing appeared obviously tampered with, but Sarah remained unresponsive despite Emma gently calling her name and squeezing her hand. Frank entered quietly, closing the door behind him. How is she? Sedated, Emma determined after checking her mother's pupils. Not standard protocol for cardiac patients. Someone altered her medication orders. Frank checked the window and bathroom, ensuring they were truly alone. We have maybe 10 minutes before someone realizes that guard isn't a real officer and wasn't actually assigned here. Emma nodded, continuing her assessment of her mother. I can't move her like this. The sedation is too deep. She needs medical attention. Which makes this the perfect trap, Frank concluded grimly. They knew you wouldn't leave her. Now they just wait for Anthony's people to arrive, probably as law enforcement or medical staff. A soft sound from the bed interrupted them. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus through the pharmaceutical haze. Emma, her voice emerged as barely a whisper. You shouldn't have come. Emma leaned closer. Mom, what happened? Who did this to you? Sarah's fingers weakly clutched her daughter's hand. Man came after you left. Injection. Her eyes drifted to Frank, widening slightly in recognition. Frank, after all these years. I'm here, Sarah, Frank confirmed, moving to the opposite side of the bed. We're going to get you somewhere safe. Sarah's head moved in a minute negative gesture. No time. Anthony knows about the box. Her breathing labored with the effort of fighting through sedation. Go now. Get the evidence. I'm not leaving you, Emma insisted. Sarah's grip tightened momentarily with surprising strength. Listen to me. This is bigger than us. Your father died protecting that information. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless. Frank checked his watch. Emma, she's right. If Anthony's men reach the bank before we do, everything your father died for disappears forever. Torn between immediate family loyalty and the larger mission her father had given his life. For Emma hesitated. Sarah's eyes, though clouded by medication, conveyed absolute certainty. I'll be fine, Sarah whispered. Hospital full of people. They won't risk killing me here. Too public. I can arrange bureau protection, Frank added. Legitimate agents I still trust. But we need to move now if we're going to reach the bank when it opens. Emma's medical training warred with her emotional instincts. Finally, she pressed her lips against her mother's forehead. I'll come back for you, I promise. Sarah managed a weak smile. Find the truth for your father. Frank was already on his phone speaking quietly but urgently to someone he clearly trusted. Emma performed one final check of her mother's vital signs, adjusting the oxygen flow slightly to compensate for the respiratory depression from sedation. Bureau protection will be here in 15 minutes, Frank announced. We need to be gone before they arrive. Fewer connections to trace. They exited through the service stairs, abandoning their borrowed lab coats in a laundry bin. The night had deepened that liminal hour when even New York's restless energy temporarily dimmed. They hailed a taxi several blocks from the hospital, directing it to a location 10 blocks from their actual destination. Anthony will have men watching the bank, Frank reasoned, as they walked the remaining distance. We need a plan to access the safety deposit box without being intercepted. The eastern sky showed the first subtle lightening of approaching dawn. Street sweepers and delivery trucks comprised most of the traffic, the workaday machinery of the city grinding into motion, while most citizens still slept. The bank opens at 9, Emma noted. That gives us almost 3 hours. Frank guided them toward an all-night diner, selecting a booth with clear sight lines to the entrance and kitchen. First, we need to determine exactly what we're looking for and why it matters after 20 years. Over coffee, neither wanted but both needed. Frank filled in the historical gaps. Project Phoenix had begun as an FBI operation targeting organized crime's infiltration of legitimate businesses, particularly in construction and waste management. Robert Reynolds had been inserted into Salvatore's organization, posing as an engineering consultant for their various construction projects. What your father discovered went far beyond typical mob operations, Frank explained, voice low despite the empty diner. Anthony Salvatore had formed connections with several federal judges and at least 2 senators. He was building a shadow network of influence that would have made the family virtually untouchable. And my father had proof, Frank nodded. Names, dates, recordings, bank transfers. Enough to bring down not just Anthony, but his entire network. Carlo actually supported your father's efforts. The old man wanted to legitimize the family business transition to entirely legal operations. Anthony saw that as weakness. Emma processed this information, matching it with fragments from her father's journal. So Anthony discovered my father was FBI and ordered the warehouse fire. We believe so, though we could never prove it. Your father was supposed to meet me the night of the fire to hand over his final evidence compilation. He never arrived. Frank's weathered face showed the burden of 2 decades of unanswered questions. The official investigation concluded that Robert had gone rogue, was potentially working for the Salvatore family rather than against them. That's absurd, Emma protested. Without his evidence and with certain highly placed individuals controlling the narrative that became the official story. Frank's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the table. I was nearly fired for disputing the findings. Eventually transferred to a field office in Nevada until retirement. Emma studied the man across from her, recognizing the weight of unfulfilled promises he had carried for 20 years. You never stopped looking for the truth, did you? Frank's smile was tinged with sadness. I made a promise to your father. In our line of work, that's sacred. As the city awakened around them, they formulated their approach. The bank would have security cameras, possibly facial recognition technology. Anthony's men would be watching, likely positioned at various observation points with clear views of the entrance. We need a distraction, Frank concluded, something to draw attention away from the bank entirely. Emma's hand unconsciously moved to her father's pocket watch. Or we create a situation where they think we've been diverted elsewhere while we actually access the box. Frank raised an eyebrow. Misdirection. Your father was fond of that tactic. The hospital, Emma suggested. We leak information that Mom is being transferred to another facility. They'll assume we're focusing there trying to protect her or extract information from her. Frank nodded slowly. I have a former colleague who can help spread that information through channels Anthony's people would monitor. He made a brief phone call, speaking in what seemed like casual conversation, but clearly conveyed coded information. By 8:30, they were positioned near the bank, observing from the cafe across the street. Frank had identified 3 potential watchers, a man reading a newspaper at the bus stop despite multiple buses passing, another washing already clean windows at the storefront next door, and a woman walking the same dog past the bank entrance for the 3rd time. Amateur hour, Frank muttered disapprovingly. Anthony should have hired professionals. At precisely 8:45, Frank received a text message. He showed the screen to Emma. Transport confirmed. Medical convo departing Methodist in 15 minutes. That should pull their attention away, Frank noted with satisfaction. Now we need to alter our appearances enough to avoid immediate recognition. From his shoulder bag, Frank produced two baseball caps and a pair of glasses for Emma. Simple but effective. Most security cameras are positioned from above. The bills of the caps obscure facial recognition points. Emma secured her hair beneath the cap and donned the glasses. Frank added a scarf that partially covered his lower face, reasonable in the morning chill, but functionally obscuring. They crossed the street separately, timing their arrival at First National Bank to coincide with its opening. Other customers created natural cover as they entered, just two more New Yorkers conducting routine financial business. The safety deposit vault required identification. Emma presented her driver's license listing the same address as her mother's. The attendant checked his registry. "Box 247, he confirmed. "I'll need to see the key as well." Emma produced the small key her mother had given her. The attendant nodded, leading them to a private viewing room where he unlocked the outer door of box 247 with the bank's master key. Emma inserted her key into the second lock, but the mechanism refused to turn. "Is there a problem?" the attendant asked. Emma remembered Frank's words about her father's final insurance policy, the silver coin. She reached into her pocket, producing the coin Frank had given her at the diner. "This box has special security protocols," she explained confidently. "I need to use this authentication device first." The attendant looked confused but stepped back respectfully. "Take your time, Ms. Reynolds." When he had left the private viewing room, Frank examined the lock more closely. "There should be a small slot somewhere. Your father was fascinated by mechanical puzzles and alternative security measures." Emma located an almost invisible opening on the underside of the lock housing. The coin slid into place with a satisfying click, and suddenly the key turned smoothly. The safety deposit box opened to reveal a waterproof document case sealed and untouched for 20 years. Frank stood guard at the door while Emma opened the case. Inside, she found a USB drive that appeared surprisingly modern for technology from 20 years ago, a handwritten journal similar to the one she'd found at home, but filled with more detailed information, several micro-cassette tapes in a sealed envelope addressed simply "For Emma." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, two things are true. I am gone, and you have become exactly the person I always believed you would be. Brave enough to seek the truth, smart enough to find it. What you hold in your hands is the culmination of 3 years undercover work. Evidence that will expose corruption at the highest levels of our justice system. Judges who have been compromised, politicians who serve private interests while betraying public trust. I made copies of everything. This set is the only complete compilation. Trust Frank Russo if he's still around. He was always a good man in a system that sometimes rewards the opposite. Most importantly, know that everything I did, every risk I took, was to build a world where justice means something real. A world worthy of you. With eternal love, Dad." Emma carefully returned the letter to its envelope, blinking back tears that threatened to blur her vision. The emotion needed to wait. There would be time for grief and healing later, after completing her father's mission. "We need to get these somewhere safe," she told Frank, indicating the evidence collection. "Somewhere we can review everything thoroughly before deciding next steps." Frank nodded. "I have a safe house in Queens, unofficial, not in any bureau records." They resealed the document case and exited the private viewing room. The bank lobby appeared normal, customers conducting routine transactions, security guards maintaining casual vigilance. They had almost reached the exit when Emma noticed a familiar face entering. Michael Salvatore, Don Carlos' eldest son and Anthony's brother. Unlike Anthony, Michael had maintained a legitimate business profile, managing the family's real estate investments and charitable foundation. His presence at this particular bank at this particular moment couldn't be coincidence. Frank noticed her sudden tension. "What is it?" "Michael Salvatore just walked in," Emma whispered. Frank's expression remained neutral while his eyes quickly assessed. "Keep walking. Don't acknowledge him. Could be coincidence, could be Anthony sent him." They continued toward the exit, maintaining casual pace despite the urge to hurry. 3 steps from the door, Michael's voice called out, "Ms. Reynolds." Emma froze momentarily, then turned with carefully composed features. Michael Salvatore approached with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His tailored suit and patrician features marked him as old money, despite the family's less reputable origins. "Mr. Salvatore," Emma acknowledged, conscious of Frank tensing beside her. Michael's gaze flickered briefly to Frank, then returned to Emma. "I believe we have mutual concerns to discuss." Perhaps somewhere more private than a bank lobby. I have no business with your family, Emma replied coolly. Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. I think you do, particularly regarding your mother's current situation. Emma felt cold fear grip her spine. What about my mother? She's being transferred to a private medical facility as we speak. Whether that transfer proceeds smoothly depends entirely on this conversation. Michael gestured toward the exit. My car is outside. I suggest we continue this discussion there. Frank stepped slightly forward, positioning himself protectively. Not happening. Michael regarded Frank with mild curiosity. Agent Russo, isn't it? My father mentioned you might be involved. He turned back to Emma. I'm not Anthony. I'm not here to harm you. Quite the opposite. Emma exchanged glances with Frank, silent communication passing between them. They had limited options. The document case felt suddenly heavy in her hands, 20 years of dangerous secrets contained in one vulnerable package. 5 minutes, she conceded. In public view. That cafe across the street. Michael nodded. Acceptable. The cafe buzzed with morning commuters grabbing coffee. Michael selected a corner table positioned so his back was to the wall and he could observe both the entrance and street. The calculated choice of a man familiar with security protocols. I'll be direct, Michael began once they were seated. My father sent me to find you before my brother does. Anthony has your mother. The hospital transfer was his operation, not yours. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. If he hurts her, Michael raised a hand placatingly. She's unharmed for now. Anthony believes she knows where the safety deposit box evidence is. He doesn't realize you've already accessed it. Frank leaned forward. Why would Carlo Salvatore help us? My father has his own reasons for wanting Anthony contained, Michael replied carefully. Family dynamics are complicated. You expect us to trust Don Carlo Salvatore? Frank's skepticism was palpable. Michael's expression hardened slightly. My father could have had you eliminated 20 years ago, Agent Russo. He chose not to, just as he tried to warn Robert Reynolds about Anthony's plans for the warehouse. Emma studied Michael's face, looking for deception. You're saying Don Carlo tried to save my father. By the time my father discovered Anthony's plan, it was too late. He sent men to the warehouse, but the fire had already been set. Michael's voice carried what seemed like genuine regret. My father respected your father, Ms. Reynolds. They had different methods, but similar goals in many ways. Frank remained unconvinced. If Carlo wanted to help, why wait 20 years? Because until yesterday, when Ms. Reynolds confronted him at Gianni's, my father believed the evidence had been destroyed in the fire. Michael leaned forward slightly. Now Anthony knows it exists, and he'll do anything to obtain or destroy it. Emma clutched the document case tighter. What exactly does your father propose? Safe passage for you, Agent Russo, and the evidence to the FBI field office. My father will provide testimony corroborating the evidence against Anthony and his network. In exchange, he receives immunity for past activities and federal protection. Frank shook his head. Carlo Salvatore turning state's evidence after 60 years running one of New York's most powerful crime families. Forgive my skepticism. My father is dying, Agent Russo, pancreatic cancer, 6 months at most. Michael's composed exterior cracked slightly, revealing genuine emotion. His final act will be cleaning house, starting with Anthony. Emma processed this information, weighing alternatives against the priority of her mother's safety. And my father's men are tracking the vehicle Anthony used for the hospital transfer. Once we have her location, he'll coordinate with the FBI for recovery. Frank and Emma exchanged glances, years of law enforcement experience, battling against desperate need for any alliance that might save Sarah Reynolds. We need proof your father is serious, Frank finally stated, and we need it now. Michael reached slowly into his jacket, producing a phone. He dialed a number, spoke briefly in Italian, then handed the phone to Frank. My father would like to speak with you directly. Frank accepted the phone, cautiously listening as the familiar voice of Don Carlo Salvatore emerged. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but Frank's expression transformed from skepticism to grim acceptance. He returned the phone to Michael. What did he say? Emma asked. The names of 3 federal judges and a senator Anthony compromised. Frank's voice was tight with controlled anger. Names I've suspected for years but could never prove. Only someone with direct knowledge could have known that specific combination. Michael pocketed his phone. My father has arranged secure transport to the FBI field office. A car with 2 bureau agents he's confirmed are uncorrupted will arrive in approximately 4 minutes. Emma felt the weight of an impossible decision. Trust the family that might have been responsible for her father's death, or risk her mother's life by refusing the offered alliance. If this is a trap, she began. It isn't, Michael interrupted firmly. My father is many things, but his word once given is absolute. Family honor demands it. The minutes stretched into infinity as they waited, Emma's thoughts racing through possibilities and consequences. Frank maintained vigilant observation of the street, body tense with readiness. A black SUV with federal government plates pulled to the curb outside the cafe. Two men in suits emerged, scanning the surroundings before approaching the entrance. Frank studied them intently. Thompson and Ramirez, he identified. I worked with Thompson years ago. Straight arrow, incorruptible. Don't know Ramirez. Michael nodded. Ramirez is new but thoroughly vetted. My father has sources inside the Bureau Personnel Division. Emma clutched the document case containing 20 years of secrets and her father's final message. I'm not leaving without ensuring my mother's safety. The fastest way to help Sarah is getting that evidence to people who can act on it officially, Frank reasoned. Every minute we delay gives Anthony more time to cover his tracks. The agents enter the cafe, immediately identifying their table. Thompson approached, first recognition flickering in his eyes as he spotted Frank. Russo, they said you might be involved. He extended credentials for inspection. Agent Thompson, Organized Crime Task Force. This is Agent Ramirez. Frank verified the identification before making introductions. Thompson addressed Emma directly. Ms. Reynolds, we understand you have evidence pertaining to corruption within federal agencies and organized crime connections. We're authorized to transport you and that evidence to secure facilities immediately. Emma hesitated, still torn between cooperation and suspicion. My mother has been abducted by Anthony Salvatore. I need guarantees of her safety before I go anywhere. Thompson nodded, understanding. A task force has already been mobilized based on information received from Carlos Salvatore. Extraction team is en route to a location in New Jersey where we believe she's being held. New Jersey? Emma looked to Michael questioningly. Anthony maintains a private medical facility there, officially for rehabilitation services, but actually for treating associates who can't risk hospital documentation, Michael explained. Agent Ramirez gestured toward the door. We should move now. Our presence here has likely been noticed. As if confirming his assessment, a black sedan slowed noticeably across the street, the driver speaking into a communication device. Anthony's people, Michael identified grimly. Thompson took charge immediately. Ms. Reynolds, stay between us. Russo, you and Mr. Salvatore follow directly behind. Move quickly, but don't run. They exited the cafe in formation, maintaining the casual appearance of business associates while covering Emma in the document case she carried. The waiting SUV had bulletproof glass and reinforced doors, Thompson explained as they entered. Standard for high-risk witness transport. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Emma glanced back through the tinted windows. The black sedan had pulled forward but made no attempt to follow. Instead, the driver appeared to be reporting their departure. They're tracking us, she noted with concern. Ramirez nodded from the driver's seat. Expected, but they won't risk engaging federal agents directly. Too many witnesses, too much exposure. The SUV navigated morning traffic with professional efficiency, taking seemingly random turns occasionally to confirm or eliminate potential surveillance. Emma clutched the document case on her lap, the physical manifestation of her father's sacrifice and final mission. How long until we reach the FBI office, she asked. Approximately 20 minutes, Thompson replied. Once there, you'll be placed in a secure interview room while the evidence is processed. We'll need your statement regarding how you obtained it and what you understand about its contents. Frank had maintained vigilant observation of their route, eyes constantly scanning surrounding traffic for threats. Any word on the extraction team's status for Sarah Reynolds? Thompson checked his secure phone. Team is in position outside the facility, awaiting final authorization for entry. Emma felt conflicted emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. After 20 years of unanswered questions, events were accelerating with dizzying speed. Her father's evidence might finally bring justice, but her mother's safety remained in jeopardy. Michael Salvatore sat silently beside her, his presence a reminder of the strange alliance necessity had forced. The son of the man who had dominated New York's criminal underground for decades, now instrumental in potentially bringing down his own brother. Why? Emma asked him quietly. Why turn against your own brother? Michael's eyes remained fixed on the passing city landscape. Family loyalty isn't blind loyalty, Ms. Reynolds. Anthony betrayed our father's trust repeatedly, undermined his authority, corrupted the legitimate businesses we spent decades building. He finally turned to meet her gaze. And he murdered an FBI agent whom my father respected. Some lines shouldn't be crossed even in our world. The FBI field office occupied an unassuming building in Lower Manhattan, its exterior deliberately understated. Security protocols intensified as they approached multiple checkpoints, verifying identities and authorization. Emma observed with clinical detachment, professional systems engaging to manage her emotional turmoil. They were escorted to separate interview rooms, standard procedure, Thompson explained apologetically. Emma refused to surrender the document case until properly inventoried in her presence, a condition Thompson accepted after brief consultation with superiors. The interview room contained the expected minimalist furnishings, table chairs, recording equipment, and the ubiquitous one-way mirror. Emma placed the case on the table, maintaining physical contact as if it might disappear otherwise. A female agent entered, introducing herself as Special Agent Diana Chen, Integrity Division. Her presence indicated the serious nature of potential internal corruption the evidence might reveal. Ms. Reynolds, Agent Chen began, I understand the circumstances that brought you here today are extremely difficult. Before we begin formal processing of the evidence, is there anything you need, water, coffee? Emma appreciated the small humanity in the question. Information about my mother. Has the extraction team made contact yet? Chen checked her tablet. They've entered the facility. Preliminary reports indicate 5 individuals in custody, but no confirmation on your mother's status yet. I'll update you as soon as we have definitive information. The formal inventory process began. Each item from the safety deposit box was carefully removed, photographed, labeled, and secured. The USB drive presented technological challenges, its older format requiring specialized equipment to access without data corruption risk. Emma provided detailed explanation of how she discovered the evidence, her encounter with Don Carlo, the journal found at home, and the safety deposit box retrieval. She withheld nothing, understanding that complete disclosure strengthened the legal foundation for eventual prosecution. Agent Chen listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but otherwise allowing Emma's narrative to flow uninterrupted. The recording equipment captured every word for future reference. Your father was a brave man, Chen noted when Emma concluded her account. His work may finally see completion after 20 years. Emma traced her fingers over her father's letter, the last communication across decades of absence. He deserves to have his name cleared. The official records still list him as corrupt. That will change, Chen assured her. Based on preliminary assessment of this evidence, a full review of the case will be initiated immediately. A knock interrupted them. Thompson entered, his expression confirming news before he spoke. Extraction successful. Sarah Reynolds has been recovered and is being transported to secure medical facilities. Relief washed through Emma like a physical force. Is she all right? Sedated but stable. Doctor accompanying the transport team reports no immediate concerns beyond the effects of the sedation itself. Thompson allowed himself a small smile. She was apparently giving her captors considerable difficulty despite her condition. Refused medication, demanded legal representation, and generally made herself extraordinarily uncooperative. Emma felt pride mingled with her relief. Sarah Reynolds had survived 20 years of single motherhood after losing her husband under traumatic circumstances. A few kidnappers were clearly insufficient to intimidate her. When can I see her? She'll be brought here once medically cleared, probably a few hours. Thompson's expression became more serious. In the meantime, we have a developing situation. Anthony Salvatore has learned of his brother's cooperation with federal authorities. He's reportedly mobilizing resources. Chen shared a meaningful glance with Thompson. Miss Reynolds should be moved to more secure facilities immediately. Emma straightened in her chair. I'm not going anywhere until I see my mother and know this evidence will actually be used. I didn't risk everything just to have this buried again. No one is suggesting burial, Chen assured her. Quite the opposite. The director himself has taken personal interest in this case given the implications of judicial corruption. Thompson added, but Anthony Salvatore has resources even within federal agencies. Until we've completely contained the situation, your safety remains at risk. Emma considered her options. The evidence was now in official custody, its existence documented and recorded. Her mother had been rescued. The immediate objectives had been achieved. I need to speak with Frank Russo before making any decisions about protective custody, she stated firmly. Thompson nodded. He's requested the same. I'll arrange it. Left alone briefly, Emma found herself experiencing the first moments of relative safety since discovering the photograph in Don Carlo's private dining room. The constant vigilance of the past 24 hours had depleted her physical and emotional reserves. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself the luxury of a moment's rest. The door opened to admit Frank, looking similarly exhausted, but with the underlying satisfaction of a mission nearing completion. "They found your mother," he said without preamble. "She's already regaining consciousness and apparently threatening legal action against everyone within earshot." Emma smiled despite her fatigue. "Sounds like her. What's happening with Don Carlo and Michael?" "Carlo is providing formal deposition from his home given his medical condition. Michael is cooperating fully, providing insider details that corroborate the evidence from your father's cache." "And Anthony?" Frank's expression darkened. "Wind in the wind currently, but every law enforcement agency in the Northeast has his description and vehicle information. His accounts are being frozen as we speak." Emma nodded, absorbing the information. "What happens now?" "Protection program for you and your mother until this plays out in court. New identities, new location. Standard procedure when witnesses have information against organized crime figures with substantial resources." The prospect of abandoning her life, starting over somewhere new with different identity, seemed simultaneously terrifying and oddly liberating. A chance to begin fresh, unburdened by the secrets that had shadowed her existence for 20 years. "How long would we need to remain in the program?" Frank considered the question seriously. "Until Anthony is apprehended and the corrupted officials are removed from positions where they could threaten you. Potentially years." Years of looking over her shoulder, years of separation from the few friends she maintained, years of living under assumed identity. The cost of justice suddenly felt very tangible. "There must be alternatives," Emma mused. "You could testify and take your chances," Frank acknowledged. "But Anthony Salvatore isn't someone who forgets or forgives. He'd pursue you relentlessly." Before Emma could respond, urgent commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Raised voices, rapid footsteps, the unmistakable sound of hands reaching for weapons. Frank moved instinctively, positioning himself between Emma and the door. Thompson burst in without ceremony. "We need to move, now. Security breach on the 4th floor, possible hostile entry." Frank's response was immediate and decisive. "Back stairwell. Secure the evidence first, then extract Ms. Reynolds through the garage level." Emma found herself swept into coordinated emergency protocols, agents moving with practiced efficiency born from regular drilling. The evidence case disappeared into secure transport, her father's letter, the only item she insisted on keeping with her. "Anthony?" she asked as they hurried toward the stairwell. "Unknown," Thompson replied grimly, "but the timing suggests inside information about your location." The stairwell echoed with their rapid descent, each footfall marking diminishing distance to potential safety or confrontation. Emma clutched the letter inside her jacket, the last tangible connection to her father providing strange comfort amid chaos. 3 floors down, the stairwell door above them burst open. Voices called out commands, followed by the distinctive sound of weapons being readied. Whether legitimate law enforcement or hostile forces remained unclear in the confused acoustics of the enclosed space. "Keep moving," Frank urged, taking Emma's elbow to maintain their pace. "Garage level has vehicle ready for immediate departure." Emma's medical training had prepared her for crisis response, allowing her to function despite accelerating heart rate and surging adrenaline. Her mind remained clear, assessing options and potential outcomes as they continued their descent. The garage-level door loomed ahead, promising escape from the confined vulnerability of the stairwell. Thompson reached it first, weapon drawn, as he carefully pushed it open enough to assess the situation beyond. "Clear," he confirmed, opening the door wider. They emerged into the cavernous underground garage, dimly lit and echoing with their footsteps. A black SUV, identical to their earlier transport, waited 20 yards away, engine already running. "That's our extraction vehicle," Thompson confirmed, urging them forward. They had covered half the distance when Emma noticed a critical detail. The driver's face reflected briefly in the side mirror. Not Agent Ramirez, not anyone she recognized from the FBI team. "Wait," she hissed, instinctively pulling back. "That's not our driver." Frank's reaction was immediate, his body tensing as he registered the potential threat. Thompson continued forward 2 more steps before processing Emma's warning, his hand moving toward his weapon. The SUV's rear door swung open suddenly. Anthony Salvatore emerged, expression coldly triumphant, as he leveled a weapon directly at Thompson. "Federal credentials," he called out mockingly. "Amazing what money can still buy in this town." Thompson froze, caught in the impossible calculation of drawing his weapon versus certain death from Anthony's already aimed gun. Frank positioned himself partially in front of Emma, creating what little shield he could manage. "Anthony Salvatore, Thompson identified formally despite the obvious disadvantage. You're surrounded by federal agents. Surrender your weapon. Anthony's laugh echoed through the garage. Surrounded, I don't think so. Your extraction team was diverted to a non-existent threat 10 minutes ago. Building security systems have been compromised. And you, he gestured with his weapon toward Thompson, are about to experience an unfortunate accident while attempting to apprehend a dangerous fugitive. Emma observed the tense tableau, calculating distances and angles while appearing outwardly terrified. The stairwell door remained their closest retreat, approximately 15 feet behind them. Anthony stood 30 feet ahead, weapon trained with the steadiness of someone experienced with firearms. This won't end well for you, Frank stated calmly. Your father is already providing testimony. Michael, too. The evidence has been secured and distributed to multiple agencies. Something dangerous flickered in Anthony's eyes. My father, always the weak link, always too soft. His gaze shifted to Emma. Your father had the same weakness, principles, morality, the things that get men killed in this world. Emma felt cold rage replacing fear. This man had ordered her father's death, had threatened her. Mother had corrupted the justice system. Her father died trying to protect. My father was twice the man you'll ever be, she stated with quiet certainty. Anthony's weapon shifted slightly toward her. You have your father's unfortunate tendency to say exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time. His finger tightened on the trigger. Family traits worth eliminating. What happened next occurred with cinematic precision, each moment stretched and crystallized in Emma's memory. Thompson lunging sideways to draw Anthony's attention. Frank shoving Emma toward the minimal cover of a concrete pillar. The distinctive sound of a weapon discharging echoing violently through the enclosed space. And Anthony Salvatore's expression of absolute surprise as he staggered backward, a crimson stain blossoming across his immaculate suit jacket. Not from Thompson's direction, not from Frank, but from behind him. Anthony turned slowly, disbelief evident as he faced his shooter. Don Carlos Salvatore sat in a wheelchair just beyond the SUV, an antique revolver steady in his gnarled hand despite his age and illness. Father! Anthony's voice held confusion and betrayal in equal measure. Don Carlo's response came in Sicilian words Emma understood from her childhood lessons with her grandmother. Family does not betray family. You forgot the most important rule. Anthony collapsed to his knees, weapon clattering uselessly to the concrete. Thompson moved forward, immediately securing the fallen gun, while Frank maintained protective position near Emma. Don Carlo watched impassively as his son slumped to the ground, life bleeding away from the precision of a single shot delivered by a man who had once ruled through exactly such decisive violence. Ms. Reynolds, the old man called out, his voice surprisingly strong, despite his frail appearance. Your father was an honorable man. I regret that I could not save him 20 years ago. Perhaps this, he gestured toward Anthony's fallen form, provides some measure of justice. Emma emerged slowly from behind the pillar, processing the surreal scene before her. The man who had defined organized crime in New York for decades, executing his own son to protect her and preserve evidence that would dismantle much of his life's work. Why, she asked simply. Don Carlo's weathered face showed the complex mixture of regret and resignation. Because there must be rules. Even in our world, without them we are nothing but animals. He carefully placed his revolver on his lap. And because your father once showed me mercy when he could have destroyed me, a debt unpaid until now. Federal agents swarmed into the garage, securing the scene with practiced efficiency. Emma watched as Don Carlos surrendered without resistance, the final act of a man who had already accepted his fate. Whether from cancer or justice system, his remaining time was measured in months either way. As Thompson escorted her toward a genuine extraction vehicle, Emma felt a strange lightness that follows resolution of long-carried burdens. Her father's letter rested securely against her heart, his final mission nearing completion. Her mother waited somewhere safe, finally free from the shadows of deception that had defined their lives for 20 years. The evidence would bring justice. The corrupt would face consequences. The truth would finally emerge into light after decades of deliberate darkness. Emma touched her father's pocket watch, the familiar weight providing connection across years of absence. We did it, Dad, she whispered as the vehicle carried her toward whatever future awaited beyond this day of revelations. We finally did it. Sunrise painted Manhattan's skyline in hues of amber and gold, the city's glass towers reflecting morning light like ancient lighthouses guiding weary travelers home. Emma Reynolds stood at the hospital window watching this daily rebirth with new appreciation. After 48 hours of constant motion, constant fear, the simple luxury of stillness felt almost unnatural. Behind her, Sarah Reynolds slept peacefully, her vital signs stable on the monitoring equipment. The private room in the secure wing of Bellevue Hospital represented the full protective resources of federal law enforcement. Two agents remained stationed outside the door, rotating shifts every 6 hours. Another monitored the building's security systems from a makeshift command center down the hall. Emma's reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Dark circles beneath her eyes' hair, hastily secured in a messy ponytail, borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, the physical manifestation of her internal transformation. She was no longer just Emma Reynolds' waitress and former medical student. She had become her father's daughter in ways that transcended simple genetics. Frank Russo entered quietly, two coffee cups in hand. He offered one to Emma without comment, understanding the medicinal necessity of caffeine after what they had endured. "How is she?" he asked, nodding towards Sarah's sleeping form. "Better. Doctors expect full recovery. The sedatives they used were designed for short-term effect." Emma sipped the bitter hospital coffee gratefully. "Any news about Don Carlo?" Frank nodded. "He's been formally processed. Given his medical condition, he's under house arrest rather than detention. Electronic monitoring, 24-hour guard detail, the works. And the evidence being analyzed and authenticated. Preliminary reports confirm what we suspected. Anthony's corruption network extended to 3 federal judges, 2 senators, and numerous lesser officials." Frank's voice carried both professional satisfaction and personal vindication. "Your father compiled irrefutable documentation. Names, dates, financial transactions. No possibility of denial or dismissal." Emma felt the complex emotions she'd been suppressing rise to the surface. Pride in her father's meticulous work. Grief for the 20 years lost. Satisfaction that justice would finally prevail. "What happens now?" she asked. "Federal prosecutors are preparing indictments. Given the sensitivity and scope, they're proceeding, carefully ensuring every detail is properly documented before moving publicly." Frank gazed out at the brightening skyline. The judiciary corruption cases are particularly delicate. They're establishing special procedures to prevent the accused judges from interfering. Emma nodded, understanding. "And us, Mom and me. Witness protection remains the recommendation, at least until the major cases conclude." Frank's weathered face showed genuine concern. "Anthony may be dead, but his network isn't fully dismantled. There are people who stand to lose everything when these cases become public." The prospect of abandoning her identity, starting fresh somewhere with a fabricated history, still felt surreal. A necessary consequence of her choices, but difficult to fully comprehend. "How long before we would need to decide?" "A few days, maybe a week. The marshals are preparing options, but they won't move you until your mother is medically cleared." Frank hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Michael Salvatore has requested to speak with you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "About what?" He wouldn't say specifically, only that it concerns your father and certain arrangements Don Carlo wishes to make. Frank's expression remained neutral. "Entirely your decision whether to meet with him." Emma considered the request, weighing potential risks against possible closure. Michael had proven trustworthy thus far, instrumental in rescuing her mother and providing crucial testimony against his brother. "I'll see him," she decided, here with security present. Frank nodded, unsurprised by her decision. "I'll make the arrangements. Tomorrow morning, perhaps. Give your mother another day to recover her strength." Sarah stirred on the hospital bed, eyes fluttering open. Emma moved to her side, immediately taking her hand. "Hey there," she said softly. "Welcome back." Sarah's lips curved in a weak smile. "Emma, you're safe." Her gaze shifted to Frank, recognition dawning. Frank Russo, still fighting the good fight after all these years. Frank approached the bed, genuine emotion breaking through his professional demeanor. "Hello, Sarah. Been a while." 20 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Sarah's voice strengthened with each word. But who's counting? The shared history between them hung in the air. There are unspoken connections and memories that Emma could sense but not fully understand. "You two knew each other well," she observed. Sarah's hand tightened around Emma's. "Frank was your father's best friend, best man at our wedding. Godfather to you, though circumstances prevented him from fulfilling that role." Emma looked at Frank with new understanding. Not just her father's colleague, family and all but blood. "Robert would be proud of you both," Frank said quietly. "You especially, Emma. You finished what he started. brought truth into light after 20 years of darkness. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Tell me what happened. All of it. For the next hour, Emma recounted the events since discovering the photograph at Johnny's restaurant, the confrontation with Don Carlo, the intruder at their apartment, the safety deposit box, the hospital abduction, the FBI extraction, and finally Anthony's death at his father's hand. Sarah listened without interruption, absorbing the culmination of 20 years of secrets and fears. So it's really over, she whispered when Emma finished. Robert's name will be cleared. More than cleared, Frank confirmed. The bureau director is personally overseeing the correction of official records. Your husband will be recognized as having given his life in service to justice. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the significance. And now witness protection, new names, new lives, starting over yet again. Emma recognized the weariness in her mother's voice. Sarah had already rebuilt their lives once after losing her husband. The prospect of another forced reinvention felt understandably daunting. We have options, Emma assured her. We don't have to decide immediately. Sarah nodded, fatigue evident in her features, despite the relatively short conversation. Tomorrow is soon enough for decisions. Right now, I just need to know you're safe, that we both are. Emma kissed her mother's forehead. We're safe. Rest now. I'll be right here. As Sarah drifted back to sleep, Emma returned to the window. The city had fully awakened, its rhythms and patterns continuing unchanged, despite the monumental shifts in her personal universe. Buildings still stood, traffic still flowed. 8 million lives continued their individual journeys, oblivious to the resolution of a 20-year injustice occurring in their midst. I should check in with the protection detail, Frank said quietly. Get some rest if you can, Emma. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Left alone with her sleeping mother and the steady beeping of medical monitors, Emma finally allowed herself the luxury of emotional release. Tears came silently, cathartic, rather than despairing. Tears for the father she had lost, for the truth finally revealed, for the years of uncertainty ended. Tears of exhaustion and relief and grief and vindication all intermingled in cleansing release. When morning arrived, Emma felt strangely renewed. She had slept fitfully in the reclining chair beside her mother's bed, but even fragmented rest had restored some of her depleted reserves. A hospital aide had brought fresh clothes in her size, allowing her to shower and change in the attached bathroom. Sarah awoke stronger, her color improved, and her mind fully clear of sedation effects. She consumed the bland hospital breakfast with surprising enthusiasm, another positive sign of recovery. Michael Salvatore will be here at 10, Emma informed her mother while they shared mediocre hospital coffee. He requested a meeting, something about arrangements Don Carlo wants to make. Sarah's expression registered surprise, then thoughtful consideration. The Salvatore family owes us a great debt. Perhaps this is their attempt at restitution. Nothing can replace what we lost, Emma noted. No, Sarah agreed, but acknowledgement matters. Recognition of wrongs done has its own value. At precisely 10 o'clock, Frank returned with Michael Salvatore. The stark contrast between them emphasized their different worlds. Frank in practical, well-worn clothing, body language, speaking of law enforcement training and constant vigilance. Michael impeccably tailored, every movement refined by generations of wealth and power. Security protocols were observed despite Michael's cooperative status. He submitted to electronic scanning and physical search before entering the hospital room. The process seemed to amuse rather than offend him, perhaps because he recognized its necessity. Mrs. Reynolds, he greeted Sarah formally. I'm pleased to see you recovering well. He turned to Emma. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Emma gestured toward the small seating area by the window. You said you had something to discuss concerning my father. Michael nodded, waiting for everyone to be seated before beginning. My father is dying, as you know. Pancreatic cancer stage 4. His doctors give him perhaps 4 months. He spoke matter-of-factly, emotions controlled beneath his composed exterior. Before the end, he wishes to settle certain debts and obligations. Your family features prominently in those considerations. We don't want anything from Don Carlo Salvatore, Emma stated firmly. Michael raised a hand slightly. Please hear me out completely before deciding. My father recognizes that no financial compensation can replace what your family lost. However, he believes practical assistance with your future security remains his responsibility. He removed a document folio from his briefcase. With his cooperation in the federal cases, my father negotiated certain considerations. One specifically concerns your family. He extended a document toward Emma. This is a formal immunity agreement for both you and your mother regarding any potential technical violations of law during recent events. Emma accepted the document, scanning its legal terminology with cautious attention. We didn't break any laws. Technically, removing evidence from a crime scene, even one 20 years cold, could be problematic. This ensures no overzealous prosecutor can leverage that against you in future. Michael produced a second document. This one may be of greater interest. It's a formal trust agreement establishing educational and medical support funds for both of you, administered through legitimate foundation channels with no connection to Salvatore family operations. Sarah leaned forward slightly. What exactly does that mean? It means, Michael explained, that Emma can return to medical school with all expenses covered, including living costs during her education. It means your medical needs, Mrs. Reynolds, will be fully provided for regardless of insurance limitations or coverage gaps. Emma handed the document to Frank without comment. He reviewed it with professional thoroughness, eyes narrowing at certain clauses. This is substantial, he noted. Fully legitimate from what I can see. Irrevocable trust structure, independent administration, clean source funding. Michael nodded. The foundation was established decades ago with legitimate business proceeds. Its assets were never compromised by my family's other activities. Emma studied Michael's face, looking for deception or manipulation. Why would Don Carlo do this? My father's relationship with Robert Reynolds was complex, adversarial yet respectful. In another life, they might have been friends. Michael's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine emotion. My father believes he failed your father 20 years ago by not preventing Anthony's actions. This represents his attempt at partial atonement. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. No amount of money brings Robert back. Nothing can, Michael acknowledged. This isn't about replacement. It's about recognition of debt and obligation. He hesitated, then added, there's one more thing. A personal item my father wished returned to you. From an inner pocket, Michael produced a small velvet pouch. He handed it to Sarah with careful reverence. Sarah opened it slowly, tipping the contents into her palm. A simple gold wedding band gleamed against her skin. Her breath caught visibly. Robert's ring, she whispered. How? My father's men recovered it from the warehouse after the fire, Michael explained. It should have been returned to you immediately. Another failure he wishes to correct. Sarah closed her fingers around the ring knuckles, whitening with the strength of her grip. Emma placed a supportive hand on her mother's shoulder, feeling the subtle tremors of emotion. These arrangements, Emma addressed Michael, they don't come with expectations or obligations on our part. None whatsoever. The trust is irrevocable and unconditional. Michael met her gaze directly. Whether you accept witness protection or choose another path, these provisions remain intact. Frank had continued reviewing the documents, his law enforcement experience seeking hidden complications or legal traps. Everything appears legitimate and straightforward. I'd recommend having your own attorney review before signing, but the terms seem favorable and without concerning conditions. Emma exchanged glances with her mother, silent communication passing between them. Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, entrusting the decision to her daughter's judgment. We'll consider it, Emma stated, neither accepting nor rejecting outright. After consulting independent legal advice, as Frank suggested, Michael accepted this measured response with apparent understanding. Of course, there's no urgency to your decision. The provisions are already established regardless of formal acceptance. He closed his briefcase, preparing to depart. There's one additional matter my father asked me to convey. More information than offer. Emma raised an eyebrow questioningly. The federal witness protection recommendations, Michael continued. While they represent standard protocol, my father believes they may be unnecessary in your specific circumstances. With Anthony dead and his key network members under indictment, the organized threat to your family has been largely neutralized. The remaining risk factors are significantly reduced. Frank's expression showed professional skepticism. That's not the Bureau's assessment. The Bureau operates from standard threat matrices, Michael acknowledged. My father's perspective comes from intimate knowledge of the specific individuals and power structures involved. He addressed this directly to Emma and Sarah. You should make your own informed decision, of course. I simply convey my father's belief that you may have more freedom of choice than federal authorities might suggest. After Michael's departure, the hospital room filled with contemplative silence. Sarah turned her husband's recovered wedding ring in her fingers, the physical connection to Robert clearly providing both comfort and renewed grief. What do you think? Emma finally asked, looking between her mother and Frank. Frank sighed, 20 years of law enforcement experience, evident in his measured response. The financial arrangements appear legitimate and beneficial. As for witness protection, there's truth in what he said. The organized threat has been substantially reduced. However, complete elimination of risk is impossible to guarantee. We've lived with risk for 20 years, Sarah noted quietly, always looking over our shoulders, always wondering if someone might connect us to Robert's real work. Emma considered their situation from multiple angles. If we enter witness protection, we lose everything. Our identities, our history, our connections. We start over as strangers in an unfamiliar place. But with security, Frank reminded her. A different kind of prison, Sarah murmured, still focused on the wedding ring in her palm. Running forever. The weight of the decision settled over them. Safety through disconnection and reinvention, or potential risk with maintained identity and purpose. No perfect answer existed, only different compromises. I don't want to run anymore, Emma finally stated, certainty growing in her voice. Dad spent his life fighting for justice. He didn't hide from threats or intimidation. I want to honor that legacy by living openly, not in shadows. Sarah looked up, unexpected strength in her expression. Nor do I. Robert would want us to live fully, not in perpetual fear. She slipped his wedding ring onto her finger alongside her own. I've spent 20 years without my husband. I won't spend whatever time remains without my name, my history, or my dignity. Frank appeared unsurprised by their decision, though professional concern remained evident. I'll inform the marshals. They won't like it, but ultimately the choice belongs to you. He paused, then added, for what it's worth, Robert would be proud of your courage. He never ran from anything in his life. 3 days later, Sarah received medical clearance for discharge. The federal protection detail remained in place, though reduced in scale as immediate threat assessments continued to diminish. Emma had secured a new apartment for them both, the location undisclosed even to Frank as a basic security precaution. On the morning of discharge, Emma completed the final paperwork while Sarah dressed in new clothes Michael had arranged to be delivered. The simple act of changing from hospital gown to normal clothing seemed to transform her, restoring dignity and normalcy after days of medical vulnerability. A knock at the door preceded Frank's arrival. He carried a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Special delivery, he announced, from the bureau director himself. Emma accepted the package curiously. Inside lay a framed certificate in metal in a velvet case. The certificate formally acknowledged Robert Reynolds' service and sacrifice as a federal agent, posthumously awarding him the FBI Medal of Valor. The accompanying letter signed by the director personally outlined the Bureau's commitment to fully correcting historical records regarding Robert's service and death. It's being announced publicly this afternoon, Frank explained. Full press release detailing Robert's undercover work and the corruption he helped expose even posthumously. His name cleared completely, his service honored appropriately. Sarah traced her fingers over the metal eyes, bright with unshed tears. 20 years late, but still meaningful. She looked up at Frank. Thank you for never giving up on him. Robert was my best friend, Frank replied simply. His case was the reason I stayed with the Bureau, even when politics and bureaucracy made me want to walk away. I couldn't leave until his name was cleared. And now, Emma asked, mandatory retirement next month. 30 years of service. Frank smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. Though I might consult occasionally, help train the next generation. They left the hospital through a private exit security protocol still in effect, despite their decision to decline witness protection. The government SUV transported them to a federal building where final statements would be recorded and remaining paperwork completed. Emma found herself in a small conference room with panoramic views of the city. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Jenkins, reviewed the final details of their decision. You understand that by declining witness protection, certain security resources will be limited, Jenkins explained. We'll maintain general awareness of your situation and can provide emergency response if specific threats emerge, but daily protective details will be withdrawn within 2 weeks. Emma nodded, understanding. We've considered the remaining risks carefully. We're prepared to take reasonable precautions without surrendering our identities or connections. Jenkins seemed to appreciate their resolution. Your testimony has been fully documented and preserved for trial purposes. You likely won't need to appear in person for most proceedings. The evidence your father compiled is remarkably comprehensive. Will it be enough, Sarah asked, to convict everyone involved? The judicial corruption cases are the most complex, Jenkins acknowledged. But the evidence chain is solid. Financial transactions, recorded conversations, documented pattern of favorable rulings corresponding with payments. We expect successful prosecutions across the board. The meeting concluded with exchange of contact information and security protocols. As they prepared to leave, Jenkins offered a final observation. What your family has endured and your contributions to justice despite that suffering represent the highest ideals of civic courage. Many people in similar circumstances would have chosen safety over truth. Your decision honors your husband's sacrifice in the most meaningful way possible. Outside New York continued its eternal rhythms, indifferent to individual dramas, yet somehow providing perfect backdrop for personal reinvention. Emma and Sarah stood momentarily on the building steps, absorbing the sensation of freedom after days of medical confinement and security restrictions. Where to now? Sarah asked, sunlight illuminating her face with renewed vitality. Emma checked her phone, confirming an address. One more stop before we go to the new apartment, something I arranged yesterday. The taxi transported them to a quiet street in Brooklyn Heights, stopping before a modern glass and steel building. The sign identified it as the Reynolds Foundation for Ethical Innovation. Sarah looked questioningly at her daughter. What is this? Michael called yesterday. Don Carlo established this in Dad's name. It's already funded and operational. Emma helped her mother from the taxi. Research grants, ethics programs, support for whistleblowers. Everything Dad valued continuing in his name. The foundation lobby featured a simple but elegant memorial wall. At its center hung a portrait of Robert Reynolds in his FBI uniform, surrounded by his service commendations, and a brief biography highlighting his commitment to justice and ethical conduct. Sarah approached the memorial, slowly reaching out to touch the frame with trembling fingers. He would have been embarrassed by this. He never sought recognition. But he deserved it, Emma replied quietly. And now his legacy continues in ways that matter. They stood together before the memorial, two women forever changed by one man's courage and sacrifice. The foundation around them hummed with purposeful activity, researchers and administrators, continuing work that embodied Robert's highest values. I've decided to accept the trust funds, Emma said after a contemplative silence. Return to medical school, finish what I started, help people directly the way Dad helped through his work. Sarah nodded approval. He always said you had healing hands. Even as a child, you wanted to fix everyone and everything. Not everything can be fixed, Emma acknowledged, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. A young researcher approached, respectfully introducing herself as the Foundation's Associate Director. Mrs. Reynolds, Ms. Reynolds, we're honored by your visit. Would you like a tour of the facilities we've just initiated? 3 new research programs focusing on ethics in artificial intelligence, corporate accountability, frameworks, and support systems for organizational integrity advocates. Sarah smiled, genuine interest replacing her earlier emotional fragility. We'd appreciate that very much. As they followed the associate director, Emma felt a subtle shift within herself. The crushing weight of uncertainty and unresolved questions had lifted, replaced by purposeful direction. The past 20 years had been defined by her father's absence and the mysteries surrounding it. The future would be defined by his legacy and the values he had lived by. The Foundation's main research area buzzed with activity. Screens displayed data analysis, researchers collaborated at shared workstations, and whiteboards contained complex ethical frameworks under development. The atmosphere combined academic rigor with practical application theory translated into real-world impact. All our projects require practical implementation strategies, the associate director explained. Dr. Reynolds believes strongly that ethical principles without action pathways remain merely aspirational. Emma exchanged glances with her mother, both recognizing Robert's philosophy in this approach. He had been a man of action, believing that principles must be lived and defended, not merely discussed. The tour concluded in a small garden terrace on the building's roof. The space provided stunning views of Manhattan across the East River, skyscrapers gleaming in afternoon sunlight. This was designed as a reflection space, their guide explained, somewhere researchers can contemplate the human implications of their work. Left alone in this peaceful sanctuary, Emma and Sarah stood side by side at the railing. The city spread before them like a vast, complex tapestry. So much has changed in just a few days, Sarah observed. 20 years of questions answered. Your father's name cleared, his work finally recognized. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of her father's pocket watch in her jacket. The timepiece had become her talisman, connecting past to present, father to daughter. I keep thinking about what Dad wrote in his letter, she said, about building a world where justice means something real, where truth matters. He always believed that was possible, Sarah replied, even when evidence suggested otherwise. The foundation continues that belief, Emma noted, watching researchers through the glass walls below. His work goes on even if he couldn't finish it himself. Sarah took her daughter's hand, their fingers intertwining in shared understanding. And so does ours, living fully honestly, courageously. That's how we honor him best. The city continued its eternal rhythm before them, 8 million stories unfolding simultaneously. Among them now, the story of Emma and Sarah Reynolds would continue without the shadow of unresolved questions or unnamed fears. The truth had finally emerged into light after decades of intentional darkness. Emma removed her father's pocket watch, opening its case to reveal the photograph inside. Robert Reynolds smiled back at her across time, his eyes kind and determined, just as she remembered. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We finished what you started." The watch ticked steadily in her palm, measuring moments that now stretched forward with renewed purpose and possibility. Not an ending, but a continuation. Not closure, but opening. The legacy of truth, justice, and courage extending from father to daughter, from past to future, an unbroken line connecting what was lost to what remained possible. As afternoon light gilded the city in golden hues, Emma Reynolds understood with perfect clarity that her father had never truly left them. His values lived on in her choices, his courage in her determination, his love in the foundation that now bore his name. Different forms of the same essential truth. What we build in life continues beyond our physical presence, outlasting even death itself. Some waitresses serve food, some serve drinks. Emma Reynolds had served justice, and in doing so found her truest inheritance.